If you're trying to lose weight while training for triathlon, you might be doing exactly what's stopping you from seeing results. In this video, we're unpacking one triathlete's story and what it can teach you about sustainable fat loss and performance. Over the last few months, TriathlonDan has been documenting his journey to improve his diet and lose weight. And he's been so generously transparent, showing the highs, the lows, and the moments of self-doubt. It's been inspiring to watch. But as I followed along, I started noticing some patterns. Patterns I've seen in many of the triathletes that I work with. Things that seem productive on the surface, but might actually make it harder to lose weight, increase the risk of burnout, and even undermine your long-term health. So I reached out to Dan. We had a great conversation about his mindset, his nutrition strategy, and some changes that might help him make sustainable progress without the stress or extremes. In this video, I'm going to share that conversation and offer some practical feedback. And if you're new here, then hey, my name's James and I'm a registered sports nutritionist. I work with amateur and pro triathletes to take the guesswork out of nutrition and help them train and race better and recover faster. And whether you're just trying to shift a few kilos or want to stop second guessing your diet, there are some key takeaways here for you.
So I came into this project thinking I was going to have 7 weeks of ultra focus on diet, on exercise, and I was going to come out of that in a better position to be able to refocus on what the rest of the year is going to look like. What actually happened was I had about 3.5 weeks of what I'd call ultra focus. I'm sure there's some things in there that aren't amazing, but in my mind, I'm fully focused on counting calories, eating well, training well. And the tough bit was getting ill halfway through. I essentially abandoned it halfway through. But for that 3.5 weeks, I was aiming to be in a 1,000 calorie deficit per day, or an average of that across the week, to roughly lose 1 kilogram of weight per week was my aim, through doing a lot of exercise and hopefully eating some of the right things.
The first thing that struck me here was that Dan was aiming for a 1,000 calorie daily deficit with the goal of losing 1 kilo of weight per week. This is actually a common approach many athletes take, but as we'll see, it's not usually the most effective strategy and could actually be causing more problems than it solves. But before I give him feedback on that, I wanted to hear a little bit more about his mindset.
I've always struggled with moderation in every area of life. So whether that is how productive I am, whether it's what I'm eating and drinking, whether it's how much training I'm doing, I always struggle with finding that midpoint. I'm a bit all or nothing. And I think that just, you see the result of that through diet mistakes, through being all or nothing in how I look and how I perform.
This all or nothing mindset is something that I frequently see with triathletes that I work with. And I get it. Especially as triathletes, we're often the type of personality who want to go hard, and that seems to translate across to diet and nutrition as well. But when someone follows this extreme mindset with their diet, what usually happens is that they throw in the towel when perfection isn't maintained. And Dan actually describes this cycle perfectly.
I've had so many day ones because I've had so many, right, this is the last takeaway, or this is the last whatever. Oh, I've had a treat on a Friday night. Well, I'll enjoy this weekend, and then Monday I'll start again. That's happened so many times.
So many of us fall into this trap of starting fresh every Monday. The problem is that this approach treats nutrition as a temporary fix rather than a sustainable lifestyle. And it also makes it seem like you can't lose weight successfully without being super clean or having some days or meals which aren't absolutely perfect. But this just isn't the case. So let's look at a more effective approach to weight management for triathletes. For someone training at Dan's volume, often 2 to 4 hours per day, a 1,000 calorie deficit is simply way too aggressive. In fact, it's too aggressive for most people, full stop. When the deficit is that large, especially while maintaining heavy training, there are 2 big risks in my eyes. First, you increase the likelihood of losing muscle mass along with fat. And when you're training for triathlon, this really isn't helpful because it directly impacts your performance. You lose muscle mass, meaning you lose power, you lose performance. So a more modest calorie deficit increases the likelihood of maintaining muscle while losing weight. So that alone is a great reason for it. But the other risk, which is far greater in my opinion, is the risk to Dan's health. When you follow such a dramatic calorie deficit, you'll start straying into relative energy deficiency in sport, or RED-S. And this is a condition which encompasses the different negative outcomes relating to being in an energy deficient state, so not providing enough energy for your body. It can affect your hormonal health, your immune system, cardiovascular health, your mood, your bone health, basically a heck of a lot. And this is no joke either. It can seriously harm your health and take months or even years to recover from if it's particularly significant. What I typically recommend for triathletes following such a high training load is a more moderate approach of 300 to 500 calorie deficit per day. Now, this might seem less exciting, and yes, you will lose weight at a quicker rate, but it's far more sustainable and effective in the long run. It allows you to properly fuel your workouts while still making progress towards your weight goals, all while holding on to your precious muscle as you do so. And what I say is, think about this from a long-term perspective. If you lose half a kilo per week, that's still 2 kilos per month. Over a year, that's 24 kilos. The key is shifting your mindset from quick fixes to consistent, moderate changes that can be maintained over months or years.
Yeah, I think this comes back to my the all or nothing mentality that I've had, I'm only working on numbers. That's all I'm looking at. Of course, I don't have those things you just explained, and I know that in the past when I haven't been all on something, then it just hasn't happened. So if I said, okay, between 300 and 500, I wouldn't be in a 300 and 500 deficit. I'd probably be in a surplus or doing all the things wrong. So, but listening to that and then you explaining it, and I've definitely seen, I didn't see any fitness gains during that time really. I know it takes time, but I was doing a lot of training and wasn't getting any or feeling any better at least. So I can see how that extrapolated out over a month or two could result in declines. I guess I'm panicking is what I'm doing, isn't it? I'm looking at events and calculating back and then say, right, that's what I need to do, when actually that might not be the case.
What Dan says here is incredibly insightful. He recognises that in part this all or nothing approach is driven by a sense of urgency. He's panicking about upcoming events and working backwards from there. And this is a common pattern I see with athletes who are focused on performance goals, especially related to weight loss. The irony is that this approach often undermines the very performance they're trying to improve. So a more moderate, sustainable approach not only leads to better body composition in the long run, but also supports training quality and recovery throughout the process. I also try to get triathletes to reframe the way they think about their nutrition and about what having a bad meal or day really means. So think about this with your training, and let's imagine you have something like a 3-month training block sketched out. In an ideal world, you'd hit all of your sessions perfectly and never miss anything. But that's very unlikely to happen. You'll skip a few through tiredness, illness, time, or whatever else life throws at you. And sure, you'll wish you did those sessions, but it doesn't really make a huge difference, because come the end of those 3 months, you'll have made a 1 or 2% improvement, and you will be pleased as punch about those extra few watts on your FTP or your 10K time. But here's the thing. Why don't we have the same approach with nutrition? One meal where you didn't eat quite as intended, or you smashed a sharing bag of chocolate because you were stressed. The next thing you know, you say, bugger it, the whole week is off. You become this monster that is suddenly let loose and you wreak havoc. So what I encouraged Dan to do was reframe it and zoom out. It really doesn't matter if things don't always go to plan. What matters is keeping consistency over months, not aiming for drastic changes that aren't sustainable. And we'll talk about that more later in the video. But just as a quick note, all the things that I am mentioning in this video are topics that I talk about with triathletes in detail about in the Hub, which is my nutrition membership for triathletes, which Dan is part of. I help triathletes to understand what to eat and why, to take the guesswork out of nutrition and help them develop dietary patterns that actually work for them. But as well as nailing the daily nutrition stuff in coaching calls or the private member space, I also provide race nutrition support with personalized nutrition plans to make sure that you race feeling totally confident about your nutrition plan. If you're interested in that, then you can check out the Hub by clicking the link in the description or comment section of this video. One of the biggest challenges for triathletes is balancing their training with proper nutrition. So many of us fall into this weekend warrior trap. So we train hard on the weekends while maintaining a significant calorie deficit. And this approach can seriously impact your performance and your recovery. Your body's carbohydrate stores are limited. So you have about 2,000 calories worth of glycogen stored after a proper carb load, which might get you through about 90 minutes of hard, steady exercise. When you combine heavy training with a large calorie deficit, you're setting yourself up for rubbish performance and recovery. You're constantly trying to catch up on your glycogen stores, or you might be training with low levels chronically. And this means that your performance will suffer. You'll feel like you can't recover properly, and you'll have a fairly miserable time with your training. This approach can also trigger intense hunger responses later in the day or the following day, and it's what I call the monster hunger. It's where your appetite becomes almost insatiable because your body is trying to compensate for the energy deficit. And this can actually have a counterproductive effect because a lot of triathletes then end up eating way more later or the following day and more than they need. So they actually get these really big swings.
If I train 6 days in a week and have a rest day, I will eat the same thing that day that I would do on a training day. And I think that's one of the big problems. Like breakfast, for example, quite habitual. I'll have the same measurement of like porridge oats and a banana and some protein powder every day, regardless of what's happening that day. So I think it's just, I've lifted my eating expectations and they just don't change.
Dan highlights another really common issue here: maintaining the same eating pattern regardless of training load. The thing is that your nutrition should be dynamic, adjusting based on your training load and intensity. So this means eating more on heavy training days and potentially less on rest days, always ensuring that you're properly fueled for the work that you're doing. This doesn't mean you need to make dramatic changes day to day, but having some flexibility in your approach based on training demands can make a significant difference in both performance and body composition. This is also incredibly important for the long term too, because what happens if your training volume goes up or down, either because you're loving training and you have the time to do more, lol, or you're in a period where life is busy and you just don't have the time? You need to learn how to adjust your food intake to account for this, and not just continue eating exactly the same as when you trained for 3 hours a day, because the truth is that you just have to change. Another thing that Dan and I spoke about is something which is a powerful tool for both performance and weight management. It's something that helps preserve muscle mass during weight loss and offers significant metabolic benefits, so it's just a generally great thing to do. I'm talking about strength training. And to be honest, regardless of whether you're trying to lose weight or just stay healthy, it's a crucial part of the puzzle. Strength training is fantastic with weight loss though, because when you combine strength training with a calorie deficit and a reasonable amount of protein, you increase the likelihood of retaining muscle as you lose weight. But muscle is also helpful for calorie burn too. When you have a higher amount of muscle mass, you naturally burn more calories throughout the day. This might not be huge, but over time it makes a difference. And the other thing is that muscle tissue is just super beneficial, as I mentioned, for metabolic health. So it helps your body to better manage glucose. It provides a safety system for when you're unwell, and it keeps you fit, strong, and active later on in life. The good news is that an effective strength routine doesn't need to be complicated or time-consuming. Just 2 to 3 short sessions per week focusing on compound movements can make a world of difference. The biggest changes come from just starting to lift weights, and so that's a huge low-hanging fruit for Dan.
And when you say gym session, I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're saying an all-round, do cover various areas of the body, because as a cyclist, if somebody says get in a gym, all you're thinking is, right, I'm going to squat loads of weight to become more explosive, and that's it. You don't mean that, do you? You do mean to do a variety of things.
Now, everyone's views on this will be different, but for triathletes, I recommend focusing on the main compound lifts, so deadlifts, squats, bench press, and pull-ups. These exercises work multiple muscle groups simultaneously and give you the most benefit for your time investment. A simple approach of 3 to 6 sets of 6 to 8 reps of these exercises 2 to 3 times per week provides an excellent balance of health and performance benefits. This approach supports your endurance training rather than detracting from it, while helping maintain muscle mass during periods of calorie deficit. Now, I absolutely know what you're saying here. James, I can't fit in that many gym sessions while trying to do all my endurance training. Yeah, it's not easy, but I think this just comes back to priorities and what your goal is. If you can fit in a couple of sessions every week, it's going to be so beneficial for your health and it will help you to lose weight. So you've just got to reframe this as something that is really positive for you overall and not detracting from your goals. Dan and I also chatted about how to manage his daily nutrition, in particular around tracking his food intake. And he said something which I've heard from so many other athletes that I've worked with, and it's a biggie.
That was like a big shift for me that I noticed. So I went from logging things after I'd ate them to planning ahead, like getting up in the morning and planning my day, exercise, what I'm having for lunch, what I'm having for dinner.
This proactive approach to nutrition planning that Dan mentions is a game changer for many triathletes. Instead of reacting to hunger or making decisions when you're tired, planning puts you ahead and in control. I often recommend planning meals out for the week and creating a standard baseline. This reduces the mental energy required for daily food decisions and makes it easier to stick to your nutrition goals. And that's not to say you can't have flexibility or that you should ignore hunger signals or fullness signals completely. But when you're training at a high volume, planning your food, in my experience, is a much better way to manage your nutrition. And a common misconception is that improving your nutrition means that eliminating your treats of favorite foods, and that's simply not true. I've worked with clients who have lost significant amounts of weight while still including weekly takeaways or treats. The key is budgeting these into your overall plan. Think of it like your finances, where you have a certain amount to spend each day. Sure, the majority of your diet should be focused around fresh, whole foods, lots of vitamins and minerals. But having treats and takeaways is absolutely fine as part of a balanced diet. And from my experience, regularly including them actually increases the likelihood of someone sticking to a good diet over time. Because let's face it, which would you rather have? A really strict, super clean diet that on the face of it seems very healthy, but it makes you miserable because you aren't eating food that you love, or a diet that is mostly great quality, allows you to eat out, have fun with your food and still train well and enjoy yourself. And the other thing which we spoke about is how making small, sustainable changes can make a big difference over time. So for example, Dan usually has porridge and whey protein for breakfast, and that was just his habitual breakfast. But he had pumpkin seeds and almonds in the cupboard, and adding these improves the nutritional profile of his breakfast, adds more calories, which we know he needs, and it's a simple tweak that makes his overall diet healthier. Sometimes these small changes can dramatically improve the nutritional profile of your diet without requiring a complete overhaul. And this is another thing I regularly talk about with members inside the hub. Triathletes often think that to improve their diet, they have to swap all their meals, get in the so-called superfoods and whatever else. But actually, it can be as simple as adding some extra things in, rather than subtracting them. And I help triathletes make these sort of swaps and improve their diet. There's also a full triathlon nutrition course with around 4 hours of content, including a section on weight loss, which you get access to as part of your membership. So if you want to join the other triathletes smashing their nutrition, check out the hub, link in the description and comment section of this video. So here are the key takeaways from my conversation with Dan and the changes that I asked him to make. Adopt a moderate approach to weight loss, so 300 to 500 calorie deficit that supports training. Break free from the all or nothing mindset by viewing nutrition as a long-term journey. Adjust nutrition based on training load rather than eating the same every day. Include 2 to 3 strength sessions every week, focusing on compound movements. Plan meals ahead of time while still including foods that you enjoy. Now, you might find that many of these are applicable to you too. And honestly, the concepts Dan and I spoke about are so common with endurance athletes. And I'm so grateful for Dan for being so candid and open with his struggles, and for speaking to me about this too, because it opens the door for more triathletes to get help with their nutrition and start building a better relationship with it. If you haven't already checked out Dan's channel, then you can find it here, and I would highly recommend you going and having a watch of his videos.